Hey YouTube, I'm Richard Quiner. Welcome back to the RPG Daily and to the show Game Master's Craft. Today we have another really special guest today. This is Jeremy Samson from d20adventurerealm. This guy has run so many games that I've been aware of. I stopped counting, and that's still too many. He's got games from all different systems. He even adapted Warhammer into a more grim and dark, which we'll talk about, Dungeons and Dragons, but we're going to get into that in just a minute. Jeremy, have to make sure you're not muted. Thank you for coming on the show and for taking the time to show up. Before we dive into all of this, can you tell people what is it you do and what is your... Yeah, we'll start there. What is it that you do?
What is it that I do? Goodness.
Yeah.
I am I'm a game master. I started out with D20 Adventure Realm, just running D&D at local breweries. I like bringing people together around the game and kind of trying to tease out their creativity. And I just like playing games with people. And I like teaching people how to play games as well. That's really a big part of what I do.
That's a very succinct explanation, so that's great. Well, we need to know, of course, as everyone had a start in tabletop gaming, how did you get started in tabletop role-playing games, and when did you start running your own games?
So I grew up playing things like I think it was Dragon Strike. I think that was the one with the VHS, and it like you played it, and it had a board game, and I don't even remember exactly, but I remember just like the dragon and the flame over the TV screen, and it was amazing. So that was like kind of my first introduction playing games like that with my brother. But I didn't get introduced into Dungeons and Dragons until actually pretty late in life. So I was in the Navy for 6 years after high school, and on board ship, there's not a whole lot to do. There's not a lot of creative outlets, let's
Mm-hmm.
say. So I was lucky enough to have a guy that I worked with that had brought his new books. This was what is this, 2003? So it's like third edition, 3.5, I
Oh,
think,
okay.
3.5. And he was just kind of asking everybody like, hey, you want to play this game? Like, I want to play with people. And I loved it immediately, like everything about it. And within a couple sessions, I was already starting to write my own adventures, and trying my hand at being the dungeon master. I was terrible. I was so bad at it, so bad. But I had a lot of fun, and we did play for a few years, and then I ended up, when I separated, uh, kind of dropped it, missed out on fourth edition.
Mm.
But when fifth edition came out, I had some other friends that were also players, and then I went in full bore, and haven't looked back since.
Very nice. That sounds like a kind of a roller coaster of emotions going from 3.5. At least it sounds like you missed fourth edition, which a lot of people would say that's a good thing.
Yeah, I'm not entirely convinced. I've never played it, so I don't, I don't have a informed, like firsthand opinion,
Mm-hmm.
firsthand experience with it. But I know that there are some things from fourth edition that
Yeah.
um, are should be respected. The especially how the monsters were handled and their abilities and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Again, no firsthand knowledge, but having heard people play and heard people talk about it, those are things that I really like.
Nice. Yeah, there was one that keeps coming up a lot is also skills challenges from fourth edition was
Hmm.
apparently a very
Yeah.
good, interesting mechanic that I'm still trying to work into my games.
Hmm.
That's borrowing things from the older versions. Same with I believe it was minions, or like one hit point monsters that would just be cannon
Yeah.
fodder essentially. Was an
Yeah, I
interesting
think that's
idea.
fantastic. Like, why bother wasting tracking all of those hit points when it really doesn't matter that
Mm-hmm.
much? As far as the story's going, they can usually only take one hit anyway. So just make it more epic, right? Like
Yeah.
simplify your job as the dungeon master, but make the story more epic with just players being able to wade through entire battlefields full of these minions.
Yeah,
So
and I feel like players enjoy that sentiment of just like, oh, I can just chop my way through this. It's like cutting the grass kind of situation.
Right.
I think players enjoy those epic moments. Um, we talked briefly beforehand about your current gaming setup that you have. I mentioned you run a lot of games online.
Mhm.
What are some of these game systems you're touching? Because you said you're not playing D&D currently, but what are you playing, and which one is your favorite?
Yeah, so I am running something called Chomp. That's with an exclamation point at the end, which is a post-apocalyptic zombie survival game. It is amazing. It's like I don't know, $5 or $6 on Drive-Through RPG. It's a 5 skill character build. You gain a couple special abilities, a couple personality traits that help with the role playing aspects. I realized I didn't have a good zombie RPG in
Mm-hmm.
my library, so I just kind of did a random search. It popped up. I bought it because it was so cheap. All right, let's check it
Yeah,
out.
$5.
And yeah, and a couple days later, after I'd gone through the rules, I played with my mom, and she has
Okay.
never played before, never played an RPG ever. And I was like, okay, let's see if I've been able to simplify this down into something I can teach like freely to anybody. No,
Mm-hmm.
as, somebody that doesn't even really play the game. Definitely no RPGs, but isn't really a game player either. And we had a blast. We played for like an hour and a half. It was phenomenal. And I've been running a game of that every Friday, and with recurring characters, players coming back, and we building. It's I love the game. Check it out. It's $5. Like if you have friends that have never played an RPG before, this one is super easy to create a character. You can create a character in 10 minutes
Wow.
or less. And most people are familiar with the zombie genre, so
Yeah.
it's not super difficult to get into, where sometimes the medieval fantasy settings have a little bit of a learning curve, and
Mm-hmm.
like comfort level of comfort that people don't always have. So that's really definitely my favorite right now. I'm loving Chomp. And I've been running Microscope, which is
Mm-hmm.
there's no dice involved in Microscope. It's a storytelling RPG.
Okay.
So you're creating timelines, and you could basically take turns describing different events or scenes within the timeline and kind of riffing off of each other. It's 90% improv and no dice. And what I really like about it is that there are very few confines. The only thing you really have to stick with is making sure you don't undo anything that's already in the game. So you can create new things, you can kill things that are there, but
Mm-hmm.
because of how it works, you can always explode out time. So somebody could be like, okay, this character's dead, but I want to go back like a little bit before that happened and introduce something else that they were responsible for. So that one's it's very abstract and cool and
Yeah.
weird, and I've used it to create worlds where I play games in, which will lead me to my next one, which is Teens in Space. So I run Teens in Space with the guys over at Tabletop Takeovers,
Mm-hmm.
and our first few sessions of that game, we actually used Microscope to build the universe that this game was going to take place in. And then we
Wow.
switched over to so we call the whole series Edge of the Drift.
Mm-hmm.
So we started out with Microscope, and then we shifted over into Teens in Space, which is a it's by Renegade Games. I think that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's a little bit simpler of a concept from D&D. A lot less rules involved, less roles. And the other thing that I really like about that game is that there is like a shared NPC in the game, the ship. So
Oh,
the players
interesting.
like each play their character, but the ship itself is a component in that. So the ship can provide bonuses or provide abilities for them to use while they're traveling and escaping or fighting or whatever they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a really cool dynamic where they get to play their individual characters, but then they have to work together when the ship is being used.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
So it kind of
that's kind of
sounds
what I've
to
been doing.
me like you're playing three different like difficulty levels, so to speak, where you have a
Yes.
Microscope. You said is very much storytelling, which I imagine
Hmm.
you could sit down and just get started playing that relatively quickly.
Hmm.
Telling stories. Chomp might be a little more since you have to deal with a little bit of mechanics. in character creation, and then this one is like the higher tier of those games, and then D&D and the other crazy ones are up even more to learn. That's a lot of
Exactly.
things to keep in your head. How do you do that?
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not actually sure. I do take a lot of notes, and I usually go through, not with D&D because that game is just, it's too massive to like
Yeah.
shrink down into a quick reference sheet.
Hmm.
But what I usually try to do with these other games is create a 1 page or 2 page player reference, just like, hey, this is kind of how the game works.
Hmm.
Here's the basic mechanics, and then here's how you create a character, and in the case of Teens in Space, here's how you create a character, and here's how you create your ship. So like really boil it down to the bare essentials, and then let the game kind of teach the nitty gritty and the minutia of the rules.
Hmm.
And then I make a copy for the GM, for the game master, quick reference sheet as well, so that way I can have that, like, oh, because that's a lot of different mechanics to keep straight,
Yeah.
and sometimes I don't.
Yeah.
Sometimes I can't. So yeah, it's just a lot of note taking, and then realizing that the rules are there as a guideline, and a lot of times if they're starting to get in the way of the fun, like it's okay, like just throw it, like it doesn't matter.
Hmm.
And being a little less strict both on myself but also on my players as far as like what rules are and how they tell the story, and or rather how they help tell the story. If they start getting in the way, that rule doesn't really need to be there.
Yeah.
So that's my opinion anyway.
That's a neat way to do it, taking notes. I mean, I've tried tackling, learning new systems. D&D I really only learned from, playing it and then
Hmm.
picking up the books after that and getting into reading it and learning how to
Hmm.
study it to make videos, because I learn information and then I can tell people about it. But
Right. Right.
you've created yourself the interesting challenge of having to teach people games over and over again, because I
Hmm.
know from your tabletop takeovers, I believe that was like a community kind of thing, right?
Yeah, well, we
For a
did a
little
lot
while.
of public events with that, and that group was primarily board games. And when
Hmm.
I kind of joined, we expanded to include a lot of the RPG. So we
Hmm.
worked together to put on events and be able to offer both. But if it was a board game event, then my job was to know the board game and to teach that. If it was an RPG event, then I was a little bit more in charge for the RPG.
Hmm.
But that was, yeah, the job was pretty much the same, because we were always trying to make these amazing games accessible to more people,
Hmm.
and being able to have a like an open community, and provide game masters that are willing and able to teach was a huge component of everything that we planned. was
Yeah.
was making sure that we could accomplish that.
That's an interesting goal and an interesting thing. I never got a chance to go out to one of the tabletop takeovers games, but I did go to one of your Dungeon Sundays.
Dungeon
I
Sundays,
went to a
yeah,
couple
yeah.
of those. Those are a lot of fun, and I could see those also being a place where new players could show up and just get thrown in the middle of it. When approaching teaching a new player how to play, what are the first steps that you would take to make sure they're comfortable kind of dipping their toes in?
um I think getting an idea of what type of character they want to play first, because I want them to feel good and comfortable about whatever they're diving into.
Hmm.
So, if even if they're a beginning character and they really want to play a wizard, obviously playing a wizard is going to be way more complicated than playing your standard, human fighter or
Yeah.
whatever. But if I try to impose on them some sort of limitations, like they're just going to be wondering the whole time, why am I being limited? Or, is this game too much for me?
Hmm.
So instead, it's like, okay, you want to play a ranger, you want to play a wizard, you want to play a druid, whatever. Let's figure out what this animal shape does, and taking the time at the table to make sure that um, I, explain the rules when they come up, provide options for the player, and I I one of the best investments I made was buying all of the spell cards for all of the classes. So that way, when a new player or even an experienced player,
Mhm.
memorize it. I don't memorize spells. That's
Oh no,
ridiculous. Like
no.
there's just too many. So at the beginning of the session, we could go, okay, do you need any spells? Here you go, quick reference. And then a lot of times, especially if there were new players at the table, even if most of us knew what the spell was going to do, I
Mhm.
would have the player casting it read it. Go ahead and
Yeah,
read the card. Kind of explain what's happening right now and how you're doing it and what the consequence of casting this thing is. So um, it's just it's having patience and being willing to slow down and give like encourage people to be challenged. Like
yeah.
that's a good thing in all of these games is if there's a challenge, that's what you're here to overcome.
Mhm.
And sometimes the challenge is figuring out how to play the game, and that's good. Like let's overcome this together, and then we can figure out how to overcome that ogre later or the
Mhm.
lich or whatever, or so yeah.
Yeah, that's a really great way to think about it. That I haven't thought about that before. I had found myself, at the beginning I was very gung ho about teaching new players. Then I found myself kind of not quite patient enough,
Hmm.
and it was something I think I'm a very patient person, but I would find that maybe I would move a little too fast for people, and then I would have to stop and kind of slow down. And one of the things that I think also would make new players a little uncomfortable, and you can disagree if you disagree, but this was kind of what I saw. When you put new players at a table with much more experienced players, there becomes this kind of imbalance of pacing where the new player or the
Mm.
experienced players are like, we're going ahead, we're moving, we're doing this. And the new players might be at the point, like your new players, we have to read what the spell says, we have to follow it, go step by step. Um, have you ever seen that kind of experience? And have you ever meshed the two new and experienced players successfully?
I have. I've
Mm-hmm.
definitely seen it. The one thing that I've had a few issues in the past, but those people generally, the more experienced players that want to have a fast-paced game,
Mm-hmm.
they either don't attend the games with the new players, which is totally fine,
Yeah.
or they attend my other games that are a little bit more difficult. And the ones that stick around, even if they are experienced, are the ones that I love having at the table because they become teachers as well.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones that are like, oh, you can't find this on your character sheet, let me point it out to you. Here's where you need to look for that, you know attack bonus, or here's how you know where the spell slots are, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I've I was intentional about it, but I wasn't overbearing about it. But I really worked hard to cultivate a community of players that were all patient.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
regardless of, and I was very upfront about that with people. It's like, hey, if you want to play a fast paced, really tactical game, like this is not the game for you. And
Right.
there are plenty out there. This game is for beginners, and we take our time and we answer questions. And if
Mm-hmm.
somebody needs help, then we stop and we help them and we figure out, how we can get through it together. And kind of just being upfront about that, I think, gets rid of a lot of the issues that might arise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the more you kind of set those expectations up front, hopefully the easier it's going to run. It has been in my experience anyway. Though to your comment about not being patient, I've made the same mistakes too. Sometimes it's just like, I need to, okay, we need to get past this part, so we'll address this later.
Mm-hmm.
But we got to keep the story moving. So it is a balancing act for
Yeah.
sure, trying to make that happen.
That I would think finding that balance comes from experience and running games for, like, I'm sure you've run a lot of games for a lot more newer players than I have. I tend to find a group that is new and then keep playing with them for a while until they become the
Mm-hmm.
experienced players. My goal is always to take a new player and make them a dungeon master. That's like what I like to see, because then there's
Nice.
more dungeon
Yeah.
masters out there. But um, I've always liked the idea of being like, here, new players, let's come and play. So I'm gonna steal your advice on that one, and try to
Please.
find the patience to help people learn the game in a method that's a nice simple pace. I want to segue from that because you mentioned, I want to hear again, what is your favorite thing about the game and tabletop gaming?
um, now I forget what I told you. I really like I. It's the people, like, honestly, and that
Mm-hmm.
I'm having a struggle doing this whole virtual tabletop thing going on right now. But it's really bringing the people together and seeing the conversations and the creativity come from, in some cases, complete strangers
Mm-hmm.
towards common goals, and the funny, inside jokes that come out of a D&D session, and the incredible, like, everybody, oh, that, like, there's such an immediate connection around a tiny piece of plastic coming up 20 that you can't find anywhere else. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, it's very I don't know, like, it's primordial. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's a very fun, deep connection that people can have around that, and that's really, like, that's my favorite part.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, it's just, yeah, I
Yeah.
geek out on that stuff.
And I can understand that it is a very challenging time for gaming to right now. I think Dungeons and Dragons and RPG gaming in general is having this surge, and now is when it's shining because it
Hmm.
is all the tools to do this virtually are out there. You got Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds, and you have all these other smaller virtual tabletops and Tabletop Simulator. I'm not sure if you've played with that before. It's crazy.
Hmm.
It's insane. And if people have like a VR headset, then they're just in the room, and it's like it's nuts. Um, but then there is that challenge of not having the same in-person interaction that you would at a table,
Hmm.
and that brings a very different energy. So my question to you is, how do you keep the energy feeling the same, even though you're just talking over the internet?
So I don't.
Oh,
I've forgiven my burden, myself of that burden,
oh,
honestly.
okay.
I I tried, and
Mm-hmm.
it's very difficult. And I'm trying to create a different, similar energy instead of the
Hmm.
same, because I honestly, I don't know if keeping that energy the way that I do it anyway,
Uh huh.
is even possible. So I would much rather keep myself a little bit more relaxed than stressed over trying to create this thing that might be unachievable. And if I can stay relaxed and be having fun, then hopefully I can make sure that the players are having fun too.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what I've been doing. I honestly, I don't use any of the virtual tabletop platforms. I simply use Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
I share a screen when I need to. I'll share a map or a picture, or a player guide or whatever is as needed. But I've found that just simply the theater of the mind aspect of the game, for me, and again, this is my style of how I've kind of changed, um, is is meeting what I expect of myself to be able to provide to my players.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping that I'm improving, and it would be wonderful. It would be amazing if I could get back to that, face to face experience.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that's possible right now.
Yeah.
But I'm just gonna do my best to try and reproduce something similar, but not the
Mm-hmm.
same.
Okay, that's a good way to look at it. I think that's. I think we're all struggling with that. I try all the time. I just realized recently how important a camera can be to the
Yeah.
energy of a online game. I
Hmm.
just played one recently with Ray, got DM. I played a little game with him. That was the first time
Yeah.
using a camera in it, and it was like able to see the other players' reactions and know what was going on. It was like, oh, this is so much better than just a voice and a computer screen. It's so much
Hmm.
more connection you can get. Um, but still, it's still a struggle, and I think by the end of this, we'll all be pros at playing online and not having to necessarily be in person all the time. But I know there's plenty of DMs out there who've been doing that for years, like playing on Roll20 since they
Hmm.
started playing, and those guys are just like, this is normal. This is how it works. Um, so that's really good information. Just let that go. Relax. Have a good game. Anyways, is a really great piece of advice that I like that. I wanted to also know though. I know people are your favorite thing. What is the thing you struggle with the most?
Oh man, put me on the spot with that one,
Oh
huh?
yeah, I try.
Um, so I'm getting better at it. I'm significantly better than I was even maybe 6 months ago. But um, letting the players take more control of the game, honestly. I've realized it, with playing, and partially like we were talking about earlier with Teens in Space
Mm-hmm.
and Microscope. Those games are designed where successful roles in Teens in Space means that the player gets to narrate the success. In Microscope, everybody is kind of equal. You take turns being kind of the position is called the lens, that kind of takes charge of the next section of the story. But sharing that with other players has been amazing, and I'm trying to get better at it. That's every dungeon master, especially if you're creating homebrew. It's mine.
Yeah.
This is mine. Like I worked so hard on it. I meticulously went over every piece and parcel. All these NPCs and places have specific purposes and meanings and probably lore that the players are never going to ever experience. Um, but being able to kind of let go of some of that and let the players introduce, um, their backstory. I mean, backstories are always a good starting place, right, for that sort of thing. Like get them invested in the world, get their backstories, find out if they have relationships or connections within the world. But taking it a step further and allowing them to, well, that famous question is, what do you do? Well, I do this thing and I see this thing in the world. It's like, okay, that's not in my head, but yes, I love it. Keep going. What do you do with it? Or where do you go? Or is this person that you meet? Describe them. Tell me more about it. And then I will start filling in around them as needed. Um, and It's hard
Mm-hmm.
because you have to be a little bit better at improv, because you're going to be thrown a lot of
Yeah.
curveballs once you start opening that thing up. Um, but in my experience, again, just over the last 6 months or so, and obviously through this transition, so it's been hard, but it's been a lot of fun,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm still working towards kind of like giving players more of that freedom to interject, like their own things into the world.
Yeah. Wow, that is some really good advice for something you struggle with. I feel like that's something a lot of people struggle with. Um, my whole channel is mainly focused on newer dungeon masters, so that's something we've all been there where we're like, oh, we're running this game, and then suddenly it's not our game anymore,
Right.
and
Yeah. Hmm.
it's really great reminder that, yeah, even you've been running games for quite a while now, you still struggle with that too. So that brings, I would feel, is very comforting to a lot of people to know. That's why I asked that question. It's like people
Yeah.
can look at someone who's been running games and is in the social media space and think they're perfect, but it's like we're not perfect. I struggle with the
No.
same problem. I have so many struggles. The only thing I don't struggle with is rolling the dice.
Really?
That's like
I don't
it.
know. I struggle with that a lot.
I struggle with counting the dice up, but rolling them I'm fine with. Um, so that's really interesting. That's interesting, and honestly, I would never would have expected that because having played at your tables, you've done a great job. So from
Thank
my
you. Yeah.
perspective, I don't think that's a struggle at all. Um, let's talk about Grim Dark
Oh,
because
okay.
I've
Yeah.
seen this. I've seen you posting about it a while. You haven't recently because I know you were kind of on a break. What is the idea behind Grim Dark, and how did that come about?
Sure. So it was a mix of different things. So first of all, I'd been playing a lot of fifth edition, and I mean, it still is great, but I was finding that I was getting to a point where I would have a hard time really challenging the players and create tense moments. It would take a lot to do
Mm-hmm.
that, and whenever I did a lot, there were the threshold, or there was a very fine line between creating a tense moment and party wipe. Like
Right.
there's not a whole lot of just how the bounded accuracy and everything works. Like things can go south really really quickly,
Mm-hmm.
but it's hard to get to that point and be able to pull back in time to make it look natural, feel natural, without it being like, okay, the DM's pulling punches now,
Yeah.
which I don't do.
Mm-hmm.
As a rule, I don't pull punches. So basically, it was, how can I make this game harder? and turn on D&D 5e hard mode,
Mm-hmm.
and it was taking mechanics from second edition Dungeons and Dragons, kind of the like the survivability of travel, random encounters, that sort of thing. The random character creation, which might turn out that you're not much of an adventurer yet. It's going to take you a while. And then pulling from other games like specifically Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, the second edition, but also fourth edition. They have very similar mechanics. So adding wound tables and critical hit wounds and breaking bones and losing heads and that sort of thing. And then taking the wild sorcerer, wild magic type thing, and then just extrapolating out from there. What if all magic was wild? And what would the consequences of that be if nobody knew how to control it? So it started out as kind of a exercise in combining a lot of different mechanics that I thought would be fun, and then it turned into this really cool just really cool adventure with a lot of great players that were willing to step up to the table, and knowing that their character was at a 50-50 chance of survival in some of the sessions. We averaged something like 2 character deaths a session. I think towards the end we were whittling it down to like 1. But it was brutal, but it was so much fun. And I'm hoping to get back into it, but it's a really it's really deep, and I would have a hard time teaching something like that virtually without a lot of books, because I have multiple copies of the Player's Handbook. I have a lot of I have the Warhammer books. I have older edition books. I have a lot of different things, so it's hard to kind of whittle that down into something usable virtually. So I'm still working on it. I hope that I'll be able to get enough together to really do it justice again and start it back up. But it was phenomenal. Yeah, and my players loved it. I went from doing 1 a month to, there was just so much demand that the session would fill up so fast. I started doing 2 a month, and it was always full. It was great. We had a great time.
Wow, that it sounds to me like you have a very interesting challenge as a game master that dungeon masters kind of don't run into, or they do run into quite a bit. And it seems like you have so many people wanting to play in your games that you don't really struggle with scheduling conflicts.
Right. Yeah.
Scheduling will kill a game, right?
Yeah. I don't. Well, the way that I run my games is that it's basically a rolling party. So whoever shows up for that session, this is the adventure you're on. Now, while you're here, you make decisions that might impact where that adventure goes. But you're kind of, and I refer to it as like a train. So you jump on the train, and then you get off at another point. But while you're on the train, you have a little bit of control of where that train is going. So, I've had a group of regulars that would show up to most of my sessions, but then I'd have people drop in for a session or two. They'd find out that it wasn't for them. They don't like me as a DM. No offense, I'm not for everybody either. Or maybe the game wasn't for them either. RPGs are great, and we obviously love them. We have a lot of people in our lives that love them as well, but it's not for everyone. But so as far as filling a table and knowing that I was going to have a game to run, never had to worry about that. And I just tried to be careful to not pin a key plot point on a specific character that I couldn't bump out or bump forward depending on their availability. So if they knew in advance that they wouldn't be able to make a specific session, then I would try and change the story just a little bit so that way they could be included in the way that made sense. But that hasn't been a problem.
So the question I wanted to build off of that, because it is people who are just getting started, they find their group and then maybe it doesn't work out, or maybe they find themselves wanting to run a game so much that they just accept anyone who is willing to come and play. Obviously, you said you had some players dropped out, not liking the DM style or how the game is run. I think we've all experienced that at some point.
Mhm.
And if you're a new DM out there, you're probably going to experience that, and don't take it personally. But my question following up on that is have you ever done any sort of vetting of your players, like trying to get to know them before you bring them into the game, or is it always been a very loose kind of sit down, see how you
Uh,
fit, and then go from there kind of situation?
yeah, it's been pretty loose.
Mm-hmm.
I think it goes back to what I said about setting those expectations up front, though. Like all of
Yeah.
my event descriptions are clear about, hey, this is for beginners.
Yeah.
We take our time, and um, that generally turns off the power gamers. So
Yeah.
I don't have the stereotypical neckbeard, aggressive power gamer optimizer type
Mm-hmm.
player at my tables, because that's not the game that I run.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm pretty upfront about that. And if they do come, if they do come to a session and they're just like, "Whoa, what's happening here?" I'm very happy to explain that that's not the type of game.
Mm-hmm.
Here are some people that, and luckily we do know a lot of other dungeon masters. Like, hey, go check out these other dungeon masters that I know.
Mm-hmm.
Check out one of their games. Jump in on this, and try out different play styles and different adventures, because not every game is for every player, and not every player meshes well with every DM. Even
Yeah.
even if they're running the same adventure, you can run a published adventure. We could all
Mm-hmm.
pick up the essentials kit and start running it, and all of those games would be a little bit different,
Yeah.
and players would get different things out of them. So
Which
I
that
think just being aware of that.
Yeah, that gives me an idea of content. I think it might be interesting to make. Just have different DMs run the same adventure with different groups and just watch the story evolve. That's a side
Mm-hmm.
project. Um, that's really good advice, and keeping that expectations up front. That's really good to remember also, and just being very clear. And again, focusing on newer game masters, it's not something they do a lot. It's something you learn after running your first session. Then it's like, oh, I should really talk about how I like to run my game and let people know. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Tying into new dungeon masters, what is your number one tip for new game masters who are just getting started?
I think it's the thing that I struggle with. I think it's being okay with letting your players have more control over the game. Um, encourage them to get more involved in the world that you are building by letting them introduce new things. And it's okay to set a line. Their boundaries are important too,
Mm-hmm.
but don't feel like you are under threat if a player is so excited about playing in your game that they want to add things to it. Like, take that as a compliment, that they value your world enough to want to be a part of it. Like that's how I prefer to look at it
Mm-hmm.
anyway. I know there are other ways to look at it, but I if you can approach it from that perspective, um, I think there's a lot of enjoyment and fun and just camaraderie that can come out of something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah, the shared experience.
That's a really good tip of remembering that. And I like the idea that you just said of when a player wants to be a part of your world, that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. That means your world is something interesting and they want to be there. And I think that should be encouraged. So it's a good thing to remember, audience. Remember that. I do have a question from the audience that I'm going to ask you. And if you have any
Sure.
experiences in this, you can answer. If not, you don't have to. This is actually from my fiance, who's sitting 5 feet away from me over here. Um, and it's a very personal question because her question is, what is your advice to get someone new, maybe reluctant to play in an RPG, interested in playing? And how would you go about making it easy and interesting / fun for them? Kind of like how you described Chomp.
I would play Chomp, honestly. 100%.
Skip D&D,
That
just
would, yep.
play Chomp. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, it is an amazing entry level
Mhm.
RPG. It's the whole character creation process, like I said, takes about 10 minutes, and they have the random tables on there, so you can just roll one up randomly and see how it turns out, or you can go through and pick individually if you'd like. um, there's, I don't know, I think it's the entire book is 60 pages long, maybe. uh, about 2/3 of it is for the game master. So and it's the game is meant to be run like kind of like a cinematic type style. So you're describing things in scenes, and very very similar to zombie movies. And the other reason why I think it's excuse me, it's such a great one is because again, the zombie film is in the zeitgeist. Like everybody is familiar with zombies and different zombie movies or TV shows or whatever. So it's very accessible from a creative standpoint because they're already familiar with the like the material, the source material. So yeah, I'd roll up Chomp, and honestly, I mean, if anybody does want to play Chomp, like just message me and I'll get you into a session. Like I'm running it every week right now, and it's fantastic. Just shoot me a message and you jump on and check it out. Yeah, highly recommended.
Very cool. So the takeaway from that answer though is just Chomp, nothing else, just Chomp.
Just Chomp.
Just
No,
play Chomp.
well, yeah,
Do
just
you have
Chomp.
any other? Are there any other game systems that might be in a similar vein as D&D that you know of that are like super simplified?
I I don't. I've been a little lacking in checking out kind of like parallel medieval fantasy systems. I'm working on it. I've heard that, I think it's Dungeon World. Dungeon World is a pretty simple one. Yeah, I don't have any firsthand experience with that one, but that's on my list to check out as a simpler kind of like entry level RPG within within the kind of the same themes as Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah. So,
Alright.
yep.
Yeah, that's something to look into. I haven't looked into that myself. I've always looked at other games, but they always ended out being as complicated or more complicated than Dungeons and Dragons, like the, Dark Heresy and what was the new Warhammer one they made, Wrath and Glory. Those are just like
Wrath.
on par with D&D.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, that's not simple.
Yeah.
Chomp, good to know. Chomp.
Mhm.
Chomp.
It could be I mean, it could just be that you whittle away a lot of the rules. I mean, play D&D, but whittle it down to fighter, rogue, cleric, wizard.
Right.
Pick out a half dozen spells, and that's what the wizard gets. Pick out a half dozen spells, and that's what the cleric gets. Fighter and rogue, you just have physical skills. Like really, you can simplify it down into kind of an entry level one. All of the special abilities, maybe just all the archetypes, like the class archetypes, subclasses, just throw those out. Who cares? Like, it's okay. It's an entry level, so you could convert D&D into a really bare bones entry level one, I think, pretty easily. It would just be like feeling comfortable chopping away a lot of it and getting down to the basics.
Yeah. I agree. That's a interesting challenge, though, getting someone who's reluctant, or maybe they haven't had great experiences. This is my situation. Not always the best experiences lead to some reluctance, but you never know. You never know. So I think I'm going to try Chomp out. I'm going to go download that. Last thing we want to know, Jeremy, again, where can everyone find you online, and what can they expect to see from your content?
So if you're on Instagram, I'm d20adventurerealm on Instagram. You can expect pictures of our Chomp sessions with random photos that are basically all inside jokes currently for the players. You'll find dice pictures and some funny memes, and then occasionally some other stuff. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not as active on Instagram as I probably should be. On Facebook, d20adventurerealm as well, and that is where you will find basically all of my events. That's where I post my events primarily, and then the other place to find me is on Meetup under Tabletop Takeovers. So they're located in Orange County. So with Meetup, how Meetup is working right now, all meetups are remote, done online. So currently, I can still kind of connect to basically anybody,
Hmm.
which is kind of cool, at least through Meetup. But you can check me out on Facebook, and definitely, I mean, if you got any questions, shoot me a DM on Instagram as well.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Excellent. And all those links are going to be in the description of this video. You also have a YouTube channel. Did I see
I
that linked?
yeah, that's the Tabletop Takeovers YouTube
Ah.
channel. So we do obviously we used to do a lot of in-person gaming. So we did like social deduction games like Werewolf and Growl. I'm trying to think of Crossfire, like
Hmm.
just Secret Hitler, that sort of thing. We've done some RPGs. We played a little bit of D&D before. We've done City of Mist. We're currently working on the Teens in Space, that Edge of the Drift series. I think the first couple episodes are up on that that we were able to film before I left. So yeah, that's just kind of a place where we've been putting the silly stuff that we do. So yeah, if you want to check that out, it'd be great.
All right, and that will also be linked in the description and on the end card of this video. So everyone, be sure to check that out. Tabletop Takeovers, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, D20 Adventure Realm, all that stuff. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
That'd
Yeah.
be nice. And Jeremy, thanks again for coming and talking with me and giving me some good advice that I'm going to try to use in my own games. Hopefully someone else
My
finds it
pleasure.
useful as well. And thanks for watching, everybody.